Death Stranding 2 is not a divisive game. Its Metacritic score alone proves that. The majority of people and publications consider it to be a fantastic game. As I sit here on the eve of effectively finishing the game, right at the precipice of those final few chapters, roughly 50 or so hours in, part of me agrees that there are a lot of things to really like and enjoy about Death Stranding 2. But there are a few things that I think really hold it back, and I think in some ways the game suffers some issues that it didn't in its original incarnation with the original Death Stranding. My first issue pertains to Sam, the protagonist, the man of a few words. Sam really doesn't say all too much throughout the game, and that in and of itself is not necessarily an issue. There are lots of silent protagonists that work quite well, and if you want to extend beyond the medium of games, there are several strong but silent types of protagonists you see in movies. I guess what they were going for with Death Stranding 2 is having Sam be an extension of the camera, a somewhat avatar for the player, which is a little bit weird once you consider the fact that they've got a big A-list celebrity playing the protagonist, and you'd think that you'd want them to showcase their acting chops, so to speak. Not that Norman Reedus doesn't do that. There are certain scenes in the game which stand out, but it is quite clear that he was left very little material to work with. And again, this wouldn't normally be an issue if not for the fact that everybody around Sam loves to talk. Dollman in particular, with his incessant comments, gets quite grating at times, but everybody else, Fragile, Tarman, Heartman, Deadman even, Rainy, Tomorrow, the entire crew of the Magellan continuously talk to Sam, or they talk at him. And that's not even mentioning the preppers, the points of contact at each of the facilities that you hook up, where they all just talk to Sam, and there is never a two-way conversation. Sam admittedly goes through something incredibly traumatic at the beginning of the game and spirals into a downward depression. That much is evident, and no one's blaming him considering what happened. But what strikes me as incredibly weird and sometimes frustrating is the fact that there are often plot points in which you feel Sam should speak up or should want to speak up, but he just doesn't. Shortly after what happens in the beginning, Sam doesn't even mention what happened to Lou or mention wanting to figure out why it happened to Lou in the first place. Moving further along the timeline of the story, BBs play a pivotal role in the game itself. And whilst everybody is discussing BBs and their history and what's going on, Sam just doesn't seem to mention the fact that he was a BB himself, or mention anything in regards to his family or even Cliff. Even the fact that he begins to encounter phenomena that he encountered in the first game, particularly the flashbacks whenever he's in the elevator connecting up to the BB, or even when he's whisked away to Kojima's version of the world that never was. The refusal to communicate at times is just incredibly jarring, and it's much to the detriment of the story. It's giving Metal Gear Solid 5 vibes, where Venom basically said nothing in that game, leading to the infamous meme of Skullface and his insipid story and quote in that one extremely long and uncomfortable car ride, where he explains his villainous plan at length, only for him to not even realize that the person he's talking to isn't even who he thinks he is. Sam's peculiar characterization aside, this by and large is still very much Death Stranding, meaning that you'll get very tiny amounts of story breadcrumbed out to you here and there piecemeal, until you basically have to wait until the end for the massive payoff. And in this respect, Kojima definitely seems to deliver, particularly with the cutscenes and the cutscene direction. Some phenomenal things happen in this game. I did warm quite quickly to the new cast of characters aboard the Magellan, but again at times it kind of highlighted how Sam felt like an outsider in a cast of outsiders. And that part is fine. Sam's phobias are well documented, so it's understandable that he's quite awkward. It just doesn't really sell the idea all too much that they're meant to be this family. Another point of contention to raise, and this is probably something that a lot of people view as a positive, and I can understand the reasoning behind it, is the fact that this game can by and large be played as a truck simulator. I am not kidding genuinely when I say that I played 80% of this game, maybe even more so, riding the truck around, because it is just that good. The game very rapidly opens up a lot of mobility options for Sam, and I think that's fair. There's a much quicker ascent to where you are in this game compared to Death Stranding 1, where for those first few chapters, things were sort of drip-fed to you slowly. Here it feels like they wanted to give you everything at the beginning and just let you go wild. The issue with that is, of course, is that a lot of the difficulty, even going through some of those snowy mountainous regions, going through areas filled to the brim with BTs, a lot of the difficulty can easily be sidestepped by simply just going through, around, or up and above using the off-roader. And as such, there really isn't all too much difficulty in navigating the terrain. That's meant to be a huge part of Death Stranding. It runs completely counter to the narrative that Sam is making this arduous, long, treacherous trek across the wastes of Australia, connecting up the strands dot by dot, but he's not even breaking a sweat doing it. And bumping up the difficulty to brutal can only do so much to reintroduce some of that challenge. And an argument definitely could be made, or a stake could definitely be claimed, that players simply just have to limit themselves to reintroduce some of that challenge, not use the tools that the game provides. But it does really feel like they missed a step here, especially considering how well paced the tools and mechanics you were introduced to in the original Death Stranding. One thing that I do see people complaining about quite a bit online seems to be around the whole Strand system, the fact that you can connect up a place for the very first time and then immediately you're inundated with signs from players, with structures they've created, alongside their trikes, their off-roaders, their coffins. And comparing my original playthrough of Death Stranding 1 to how I played through Death Stranding 2, I can see why some people might see this as a bit of an issue. Again, this also leads into the idea that the game is just far too easy to play through, but I'm pretty sure there are settings in the game to allow you to remove some of those instances from other players and the way they've interacted with the world, essentially. Shortly after the game was released, or at this point it might have even been just a little bit before, Hideo Kojima had mentioned that the game had experienced a few last-minute tweaks to allow the game to be even more polarizing than it currently is, especially after seeing some of the early reactions to the game, I believe during playtesting. I'm curious to see what exactly that initial rendition of Death Stranding 2 looked like, especially when you consider that this is a sequel that definitely has more mass market appeal, especially when you consider, again, some of the more quality of life changes made, the changes to combat, which we haven't even delved into, which is probably worth talking about at this point. Combat against other humans really didn't play all too much into the original Death Stranding. If anything, the game kind of pushed you to not interact or fight against other humanoid brigands or rogue porters, I believe they were in that game. But here in the sequel, much like the rest of Sam's tools, quite early on you are given the non-lethal means to go ahead and deal with brigands. The game offers you far more combat encounters in terms of instancing or bases that essentially seem to refresh and rotate no matter how many times you put people to sleep. But also Sam's arsenal is massively expanded, allowing you a breadth of different options of which you are able to use to dispatch your enemies. That's not even talking about the copious amount of times that the story pushes you to have these combat encounters, going from things like deliveries to missions where you're meant to pretty much eliminate everybody in a base, for example. Regardless of whether or not these changes to combat were made for better or worse, I think one thing that we can all agree on is that these changes definitely have made boss fights, alongside fights against regular BTs, that much more enjoyable. I've seen some comparisons to Metal Gear Solid 5, and I definitely don't think those are quite accurate. I think if we look at third-person shooters, at least for me personally, Metal Gear Solid 5 is right up there with the top. This feels like they've struck a good balance between the jank of Death Stranding and some of the fluid, fast, tactical espionage action of something like Metal Gear Solid 5. As somebody who enjoys the zaniness of Kojima's games, the game for me has gotten better and better the more we approach the end, as things have gotten more and more bombastic. This game has only just dropped, and people are already discussing what Kojima's going to cook up next, with whatever he does next being at least 5 years away. Whatever it is, it definitely is not going to be along the lines of an iterative sequel like Death Stranding 2. If you've played Death Stranding too, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below and whether or not you agree with some of my sentiments. And also let me know if this is the first Death Stranding you've played. Surprisingly, a lot of people I know have picked this up and they've not even touched the original. If you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.